And is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank Mr. Dreyer from California for giving me the 5 minutes. Here we go again. This bill could have been done in July, but it was pulled. This is the third rule that we've had on one bill. It's almost unprecedented. I'm not sure that I've ever seen this before. But it was pulled in July because of the controversy surrounding the Speaker's remarks saying the CIA lies. The CIA lies all the time. So it sat dormant as this country was under attack. When we went to Rules Committee this week, we had a lot of amendments that we thought should have been put in order. An amendment that would direct the DNI to establish a panel to review the capabilities of Iran. It wasn't important enough to debate that when we went through the debate on this bill yesterday. An amendment that would require the CIA to release publicly unclassified versions of documents relating to the use of enhanced interrogation techniques. That wasn't important enough to debate. What we were going to do with the folks in Guantanamo, that wasn't important enough to debate. What the intelligence community did after Fort Hood and in between Fort Hood and Christmas Day, that wasn't important enough to debate. The process for authorization and notification of covert actions that may result in the death of a targeted U.S. citizen, that wasn't enough. That wasn't important enough to debate. But then we see that there's an amendment to be offered by the manager of the bill, the chairman of the committee, 22 pages, including an amendment from Mr. McDermott. And here's Mr. McDermott's own words. My amendment would have expanded upon the President's executive order to clearly define what constitutes a cruel, inhumane, or degrading interrogation so that it is unmistakable what kinds of techniques are unacceptable. It also creates criminal penalties for those who use those kinds of interrogations. Not a single minute of debate on this amendment. Not one hearing on this amendment. And we dump it into a manager's amendment, along with 22 other amendments. Sloppy work. And how do we know it's sloppy? Because we're back here today for a third time with a third rule pulling it out. It's not because the leadership on the other side believes that this is a bad amendment. They believe it's the right amendment. That's why they put it into the manager's amendment. That's why the chairman put this amendment into the manager's amendment, because he agrees with it. He defended this yesterday. Expansion of criminal penalties only to the intelligence community. On the floor defending this amendment, saying it was the good thing and the right thing to do, and it was consistent with American values. If it's consistent with American values, why are they pulling it out? Because they know it's unfair to the intelligence community. We asked the question yesterday, what are you going to say to the men and women, the front lines in the intelligence community, when you go and visit them and say you've created a special set of penalties only for them? You know, these rules, this new criminal law, you wouldn't even apply these to your county sheriff. You wouldn't even apply them to your state trooper. But they wanted to sneak them in the middle of the night with no debate, no hearings, saying this is the right way to go. They're pulling it today because they recognize that their leadership on this issue, that when they turned around, they had no followers. They didn't have enough votes to pass this. It jeopardized their bill. It was sloppy work to put this in the first place, and it's an indication of how this bill has gone through the process. This amendment was put in without any consultation with the other side of the aisle. This is a partisan bill. As my colleague said earlier, it creates some real confusion as to whether we're in the law enforcement business, whether we're in the fighting terrorism business. And I'm glad that this is coming here today, but we could have dealt with this yesterday. It should never have been in the manager's amendment to begin with. If they wanted to put it up for a separate vote as a separate amendment, but they knew they couldn't do that. We asked questions yesterday that they didn't answer. Why does this amendment define a criminal offense that only intelligence community personnel would be guilty of? They wouldn't answer that. They wouldn't engage in that debate. The amendment would make it a crime for depriving the individual of necessary food, water, sleep. How does the bill define necessary? participate in acts intended to violate the individual's religious beliefs? Is there an objective standard? Then it gets into phobias. Exploit the phobias of the individual. We asked the other side, please define this for us, and they didn't. Another minute? 30
I'm happy to yield my friend an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for additional 30 seconds.
Thank my colleague. They weren't willing to answer any of those questions or even have a debate or a discussion on what that amendment meant. So that's why we're back here today. But the bottom line is it's a symptom. It's a symptom of the confusion on the other side, sloppiness with which they've brought this bill to the floor, and I'm glad that they've taken this lousy amendment and they're going to trash it today. It should never have been in there. It jeopardized and attacked our men and women on the front lines who are keeping us safe each and every day. The McDermott Amendment was an insult to American men and women in the intelligence community. With that, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our country and our intelligence community are at a crossroads. Over the last 14 months, we've been struggling as to whether we were going to be focused on defeating terrorists or whether we were going to be focused on a law enforcement approach. This couldn't have been defined more clearly than what it was yesterday when the manager of this bill brought forward an amendment that would have put our intelligence community professionals at risk, putting them under criminal statute that you wouldn't even apply to your local sheriff or your local state trooper. Thankfully, many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle joined with us and forced the majority to go back and rewrite the rule and come back and strip that provision from the bill. But that move yesterday should not have been a surprise. You know, it was only last year that the Attorney General appointed a special prosecutor to investigate CIA personnel, even though career Justice Department officials had already decided that there was no basis for prosecution. It appears that the majority wants to investigate and prosecute everyone who has been involved in our critical interrogation programs except themselves. The records of briefings have shown clearly and repeatedly that Democratic and Republican leadership of the House were briefed early and often on the use of the same techniques that they wanted to criminalize yesterday, and they never objected. And while there's been a selective release of certain briefing documents over the last few days, the record is far from complete because the administration and the majority have repeatedly blocked requests and amendments to publicly release a full unclassified version of the briefing records. Who knew what and when? The motion to recommit would stop the criminalization of our national security policy, ensure that members of Congress would be as accountable for their conduct as the majority wants to hold the men and women of the CIA. The motion would ask the CIA Inspector General to conduct an independent review of whether any member of Congress objected to the use of the techniques to review what steps were taken and to require the release of all the briefing memos. If the majority was not briefed or raised concerns, it should have nothing to fear from an independent and objective review of the facts by the Inspector General. And secondly, the motion would also clarify once and for all that the Director of National Intelligence should be in charge of coordinating interrogation of terrorists and should ensure that we have collected all actionable intelligence before reading terrorists their Miranda rights. This is a proposition that should not be controversial. Why is this in here? It was only on Christmas Day that the DNI, the director... It was only on Christmas Day that the DNI, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, the Secretary of Homeland Security, all said that they were not consulted before the Christmas Day bomber was read his Miranda rights. These provisions are fully consistent with all of the other authorities that have been given to the DNI to coordinate the activities of the intelligence community. It makes no sense for the DNI to be in charge of coordinating all other intelligence activities, but then that the Attorney General is in charge of interrogation of foreign terrorists. This motion would place the emphasis back where it belongs. It would align accountability and authority for those who make the decisions with the DNI. The DNI is responsible for collecting intelligence to prevent attacks. This is where we need to go. We can answer two fundamental questions with this motion to recommit. Who knew what, when, on enhanced interrogation techniques? Before we go and prosecute people in the intelligence community, let's have a clear record of what members of this body knew and approved, because basically the administration and this Congress asked the intelligence personnel to do what they did. They were following our orders and instructions to keep America safe. And the second thing is, let's make sure that the DNI, the person with the responsibility to keep us safe, has the final decision on when and how we will interrogate foreign terrorists to keep America safe. It's his job. It's his responsibility. Let's get rid of the confusion. Let's get the alignment. Let's do what's necessary to keep America safe and to protect and recognize the service of our men and women in the intelligence community. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.